to Dialogue. Lao President Thongloun Sisoulith is in the middle of a three-day state visit to China this week at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. What is on the agenda of the president's visit? How are the two countries cooperating in trade and economic development? And how is the railway linking China and Laos serving the needs of both nations? To help us understand these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined today by Victor Gao Zhikai, Chair Professor of Suzhou University, Digby Ren, political analyst and senior special advisor of the International Relations Institute at the Royal Academy of Cambodia, Zun Ahmad Khan, research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion. Well, Victor, I will start with you. President Sisoulith, he has been, a familiar face for the Chinese side because he was, he used to be the foreign minister, deputy prime minister, and then prime minister. And then last year, he became the president of the nation. But this is his first time to visit China since he took the office, presidential office. So, Victor, what's on his agenda of his visit?
The president by the head of state of Laos to China is a very important event for the bilateral relations. And this is also taking place at a critical time when, for example, China and Laos need to really consider whether there are better ways to further improve the bilateral relations. We all know that the railway connection has already been in operation, which should bring lots of benefits to the Laotian side, and how the two countries can further cooperate to make sure that all the benefits as a result of this completion of the railway connection can be realized. And I think this will be truly a very important bilateral summit meeting, but also having impact on China-ASEAN relations too.
Mm-hmm. Well, Digby, we know that these two countries they are neighbors, but one is much larger, the other is smaller in terms of the size, the population, and the land area, for example. But the two countries have been handling with each other or getting along pretty well over the past decades. Is that right?
Oh, yes, that relationship has been going from strength to strength. And obviously the crown jewel in that in the last few years has been, or just this year, sorry, has been the new high-speed rail. And that's obviously bringing great benefits because we know that there's the circulation of that train has increased, almost doubled already in the first year. There's so much trade on there, plus passengers, of course. But also what's happening is that Laos is also working much more closely now with Cambodia and Vietnam also to get more regional trade and interchange working. And there's connections, rail connections being built to Bangkok. And we've just heard, of course, that to Haiphong in Vietnam, that rail project is going to go ahead. So that regional connectivity is really going to push the region forward. And I think that's beneficial for China and for Laos and for its partners in ASEAN.
Mm-hmm. Well, though, as Digby points out, it's beneficial basically to every party to this, connectivity here. And if you look at the relationship between the China and the Laos, in 2019, both governments, they signed on to this action plan for building a community of shared future between the two countries. And we do see, in your understanding, what does it mean, the community of shared future? What do we see is like they are benefiting from their cooperation on this rail line project or other kinds of project?
Thank you, Qinduo. First of all, I completely resonate with what Victor Gao and Digby have talked about. In the end, what countries like Laos or any other country that's developing, and Laos especially a country that has withstood a lot in the past decades. I mean, it's a country that's part of ASEAN, but because of being landlocked, they were not able to benefit from the regional dynamism that resulted as a consequence of the regional cooperation. That said, I think a community for a shared future recognizes, this concept recognizes that not only regions, but we as a global community, we prosper and perish together. Secondly, what's important is that development needs to be people-centric. And there's one thing that all countries in the world agree to, it's the SDGs, it's the concept that we need to improve people's lives. And that is really what's at the heart of China's Belt and Road Initiative. When you talk about further, concepts like the GDI, GSI, etc., It's all about building opportunities for countries, economies, and as a consequence, people to have better hope, to have better opportunities, and to look forward to a better future. So I think when China and Laos, I mean, they agreed to this project, many countries under the BRI have conceived such projects that spur regional connectivity, and Laos Railway, this railway is an example of how the BRI can really encourage regional connectivity. And the global media worldwide, people are covering and recognizing the impact this has on lives of ordinary people. For example, the lives of farmers in Laos has improved. People are able to move around more easily, and it's spurring a kind of dynamism that Laos has always sought. So this is definitely a positive development, and it is compatible with the vision that China is taking the Belt and Road forward with.
Well, people-centric. We'll come back to touch upon that a little bit more. Well, Digby, of course, part of the purpose for the connectivity with the rail line is to say for trade, for economic reasons. And if you look at the figure of this two-way trade for the first half of this year, 2022, according to data available, the trade between the two countries has increased by more than 20.5%. So this is also the period of time when the rail line came into operation since the end of last year. So that does say, I mean, the rail line represents a huge boost for trade between the two countries.
Yes, look, after COVID, of course, the economy in Laos was suffered greatly. And there is one bright point there as well. Part of the BRI was to introduce not just the rail, build the rail, which didn't stop during COVID, that was continued to have construction, but also the infrastructure related to high electricity transmission lines were built right through Laos, and Laos is now exporting electricity also to other countries in ASEAN, and that's been a big boon. That's part of the BRI. So these things all go together. And the trade volume is going to increase, not just with China, because remember that ASEAN and China are each other's largest trading partners, but also with the area that we're talking about specifically, which is Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, and also Thailand. And also access to education has been a big thing for Laos, and China has offered quite a few scholarships to Lao students, and that's also going to help, because you need to have trained cadres to be able to support all of this new economic activity. And Laos is also suffering greatly now from exported inflation from the United States. It's depressed its currency enormously. And so having all of this connectivity and increased trade with China and other ASEAN partners is really going to help Laos get through this.
Well, Digby, if you look at the figures, for example, in 2021, Laos earned $900 million in their agricultural products to China. And also, when I was doing research, I found out that, the made in Laos has been a better quality products, mostly the agricultural products, for example, bananas, watermelons, and other kinds of the crops over there. This is really something, because China, I mean, it's a huge market, right? And exports to China is basically limitless.
Yes, it's limitless. I mean, basically, this is really off quite a low base, and I think China is going to be importing far more agricultural product. Food security is so important, and Laos has not yet developed in any way fully its agricultural capacity. So that's going to be something big for the future. But Laos also has to be able to diversify to other markets in ASEAN. It can't just rely on China. And I think, all of this infrastructure help through BRI is going to help it do that, and having its partners, the CLV partners as they're called, and they've just had a meeting here in Phnom Penh, and they've talked about making that partnership stronger to get more regional trade going as well. So it all looks very, very good for Laos if it can continue on the path that it's the good neighborly path with China and with ASEAN.
Well, Zoom, speak of this, people-centric. If you look at the agricultural products to China, for example, the farmers, because farmers in Laos used to, they basically rely on the, 2 or 3 seasons of rice harvest. But now, because of, the need from China in terms of their exports of agricultural products, they basically, grow products a year round. So there's no months basically for people to have this downtime, and the people are saying that they are having more, the income has been increased, the jobs, they need more people to be in that sector. So that's, I mean, real benefits for local farmers.
That's agreed, Chindo. I think that's really a sign of the kind of dynamism that the Belt and Road, hopes to induce in individual countries. So, for example, when we talk about infrastructure that is enabling opportunities for people, at the same time, through the Belt and Road, through cooperation, and Dr. Digby mentioned this as well, that we have, I mean, on a very people-centric, people-to-people level, a lot of developments emerging under the Belt and Road mandate. So you have students coming to China learning, you have agriculture specialists, engaging on both sides and understanding how to improve agriculture practices. And then you have more mobility now, more access to the Chinese market, which is encouraging farmers to invest more in this sector because they're able to reap the benefits of that investment. So I think definitely when we think about the Belt and Road, when we think about railway networks, when we think about improved infrastructure, essentially what we are looking at is the impact it has on societies and the impact it has on entire regions. So as opposed to some naysayers, I mean, who are trying to think of the Belt and Road as just China trying to dominate, you clearly see that this railway is not just about China-Laos. It's about enabling opportunities, synergy, and better connectivity in the entire region. And China is one of the beneficiaries of this development. But I think beyond that, it is also a case study for other regions that are that have signed up to the Belt and Road, that are also enabling better opportunities for their people under the Belt and Road mandate. It's a good case study for them to follow and understand how can regional connectivity be spurred through railway networks, etc. So it can encourage many developing countries to think about how they can engage their regions in a more effective way and improve opportunities for their own people.
Well, Zoom, speak of the people-centric, if you look at this real line, it creates, it provides this, tangible and real benefits for local people. For example, in a story covered by CNN, actually, as a college students who is from, who goes to Vientiane, the capital city, to study, and who is from the northern part of the country. Usually it takes her, if she took a bus before in the past, that's about 20 hours of a long journey, but now it's less than 4 hours and air conditioned 4 hours. So situation is much better. In the past, she only visited her family like once in 3 years. Of course, you miss your parents, your family members, but now she can do that actually a couple of times every year. I mean, that's life-changing, for any individual in terms of travel.
I'll use Victor's word, transformative. I think a lot of people, when initially the concept of the BRI and the phase 1 was expressed, it was, oh, this is ports, pipelines, rails, networks. It's just hard infrastructure. But what we need to recognize, and increasingly countries and societies that weren't familiar with the positive impact better infrastructure can have on ordinary people, the transformative impact it can have on the opportunities they have, the ease with which they can, think of a job or relocating to a different city, and hence really expanding their own individual potentials. That is essentially what infrastructure is about. So it's heartwarming to see that. And I'll also add, when we talk about the people-to-people dimension, it's also about people-to-people improved understanding. We are talking about connectivity on a human level, which is absolutely essential if we think of shared future and our global challenges and our global opportunities. So it's enabling not only better economic, but also better opportunities for people to empathize with one another and to expand their horizons and to conceive potential collaborations, potential ways forward that wouldn't have been conceivable. So it's also promoting cultural connectivity, engagement. It's on a much deeper human level than most would recognize for now.
Right. Well, Victor, as Zoom mentioned, given this larger or big picture, the background, Washington is competing or containing the rise of China. So you have this kind of narrative, basically to put a negative light on BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. They would say, oh, that's the plan. China is to increase or imposing its influence on regional countries, things like that. What's your response? What's your understanding? I mean, like, is this the case, or shouldn't China somehow, like, based on their own experience, of benefiting from a good or quality infrastructure, so they can share this, at least its experience, with neighboring countries, which is in need of more investment in infrastructure?
Well, first of all, BRI is a very important initiative, but BRI in itself is necessary but not sufficient to solve all the connectivity needs in the developing countries, emerging markets, or even in some of the developed countries. But therefore, if the United States or EU, for example, really want to contribute their part to greater connectivity in the world at large, especially in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, for example, be my guest. I think China is perfectly happy to welcome such investments and cooperate with them. However, I think the US position is not promoting connectivity. It looks at the connectivity as a way, for example, to achieve its geopolitical goals against China. And this really gets the whole matter turned upside down, because the US or the EU really need to look at the legitimate needs of the developing countries first. If they adopt this zero-sum game kind of mentality and try to use connectivity projects as a weapon, then they will not succeed in their goals, and they will not really deliver real help to the recipient countries. So I think all of us need to be very philosophical. Now, you talked about kind of containing China, cutting off China. From the Chinese perspective, this is completely ludicrous. How can the United States, which has a population of 330 million, try to isolate China with a population of 1.4 billion? The Chinese population, allow me to emphasize, is larger than the combined OECD countries combined together. So I think the sooner the United States abandon this ludicrous idea of isolating China, cutting off China from the rest of the world, the better it will be for the fundamental interests of the American people. Now, China's connectivity is real. China looks at the connectivity from the recipient countries first. And then high-speed railway, like between China and Laos, will truly be liberating much more value for the Laotian people eventually. I think the Laotian people will realize that they are now not isolated anymore. They are very much connected, but not only with ASEAN, but also from land to sea, etc. This is truly, as Zun agreed with me, transformative. And I think for many other countries, especially in Africa, in many other developing countries, for example, this connectivity is the megatrend to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, Digby, if you look at the connection or the cooperation rather between China and Laos and other regional countries, I mean, it's not that China imposing this idea to other countries. It's done based on equality and respect of sovereignty, and also non-interference of internal affairs. It's a Chinese decision. It's a decision by Laos. And if you look at the extension of this line probably to Thailand, to Singapore, to Malaysia, for example, that will have a larger connectivity in this region. I think regional countries seems, they have a full realization of the importance of connectivity and infrastructure, and they want more trade and more development. That's very different from, say, from a largely Western idea of their point of view about BRI.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. And I think what you find, and sort of referencing back to what Victor's just said, the Americans are trying to, they talk about ASEAN centrality, but what the Americans are trying to do is put the US at the center of ASEAN, so sort of US centrality in ASEAN. And of course, this is not designed to increase the prosperity of ASEAN. This is designed purely to counter China. And of course, that is detrimental not just to China, but it's detrimental to the entire region, and in fact, to the global growth. So I think the ASEAN meetings, and after all of these summits we've just had in the last month, APEC, G20, ASEAN, East Asia Summit, all the leaders of ASEAN are aware of this. They're giving lip service to the Americans with their Indo-Pacific outlook, ASEAN and Indo-Pacific outlook, also with the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is not a real trade deal at all. But what it's trying to do is set standards. And you'll notice that Cambodia and Laos have not joined, and they're not going to join, because what this system basically does is it tries to set standards that are based on US standards, not global standards, US standards. And then everybody has to fit to that. And of course, that means you then need US services and so forth and so on. And ASEAN countries are not really going to go for this. And I think ASEAN has been quite good, and Cambodia has been very strong in this. And they're going to cooperate more with China on Belt and Road projects where the benefits are real, are on the ground. And then, as Zun said, there's a superstructure of services. And I think Xi Jinping has brought to light, of course, the possibilities with digital services, cross-border transactions. That's all going to be strengthened. And the Americans, of course, are very worried about that. They don't like having an ASEAN that is very prosperous and independent.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victor, back to you here. There's another issue, if you read the Western media, sometimes it is to say, oh, the debt issue of Laos, for example, this real line, 60% of the financing comes from the China Export-Import Bank of China, Export-Import Bank of China, and then 40% of them coming from this joint cooperation, basically by the two sides. Because of the pandemic, it creates some of the problems for the business, for trade, for example, because of the barriers. Is that a problem? Will the country be in trouble, or the country can find a way working with China to solve that challenge?
Well, first of all, ever since Western countries came up with this death trap idea to accuse China of, manhandling some of the projects with the developing countries, I've always been puzzled, because I used to be a financier, spending many years in the financial sector. And I always see, if you want to do any real project in project financing, for example, debt and equity will always be very important. A combination of the two will really create greater efficiency. Is that right? And if you talk about who is the largest debtor nation in the world, it's not one of the African countries or countries like Pakistan, etc. It's the United States. The United States has the largest debt than any other country in the world. The second point is that for this financing package, you mentioned 60% versus 40%, debt versus equity, etc. I truly believe eventually the realized added value for Laos in multiple sectors will truly be multiple times than the total financing package combined together, combining debt as well as equity, because this will really uplift a lot of values in Laos. I just imagine the land along the tracks of the high-speed railway will go up. The produce they can sell to overseas market will command higher value, and then the turnaround will really accelerate. For example, the exchange of goods, services, ideas, persons, etc. will accelerate. Laos will be completely transformed eventually. So you can talk about value. Value is not static, it's not carved in stone. Value is a dynamic thing. And any investment in connectivity, in my view, will be transformative. This is why the United States built up their national railway network towards the end of the 19th century. This is why the United States built up their interstate highway system in the 1950s, for example. And lots of these things were done by debt, by financing, for example. So why should the United States accusing other developing countries of borrowing to finance their infrastructure connectivity projects? This is nothing less than hypocrisy itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zong, another interesting point, of course, is there, for example, there's a former transport minister from Laos. He said to the media is that, more than one country had promised to build railways for Laos, but only China that has done it. So I'm thinking about, whether that kind of the fact that China promised and make good about that promise, say about the Chinese political will, the engineering capacity, and also BRI.
Yeah. No, indeed. I mean, I think there are a lot of points from both Victor Gao and Dr. Digby that resonate so much in the sense that for Western countries led by the US at this point, they talk about the B3W, the PGII, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They talk about helping countries solve their development challenges, their infrastructure issues. But what have they done recently in their own countries, and what have they done to deliver on these ideas? Nothing so far. And for China, we see that China's own development domestically has equipped China also with the experience to help other developing countries with, by the way, domestically determined requirements and aspirations for their people. So you talk about the railway. This was Laos's own vision as well. They needed to connect. They wanted to be land linked as opposed to landlocked. When you talk about CPEC as well, the energy and infrastructure projects were part of Pakistan's development idea. And China was the one country that stepped in and helped Pakistan and continues to help. So it's true that track record speaks volumes. The BRI is not just an idea, it's not just a concept circulating, it's actually real tangible developments on the ground. And you have known think tanks from all over the world recognizing its vast contributions to ordinary people. So I think this experience that Laos has had and other countries along the Belt and Road have had is helping them, first of all, think beyond this concept that they're somehow locked in the waiting room and they need to follow a Western path, a Western model, and seek help to better themselves from institutions and from countries that are right now, they have somewhat a moralistic standpoint, that are trying to dictate developing countries what to do and how to do it. And on the other hand, you have China, which is not doing anything to divide countries. The Belt and Road, the SCO, I mean, various initiatives, GDI, GSI, they're not about excluding any country, but as opposed to that, what Victor said, be my guest. China has always welcomed countries across the world to become a part of a positive idea and to help countries tangibly. So Laos's experience is, reflects China's mindset, China's positive attitude. And on the contrary, countries that are trying to divide the world, I think they should understand we are not in a Eurocentric world anymore. Developing countries are far more capable of understanding what's happening, and they're thinking tangible developments.
Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qingzhuo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.